What would make a girl sing at the very moment the executioner raised his blade, and why would that song make the most feared alpha king in the realm lose control in front of everyone? In a kingdom built on bloodlines, power, and laws that show no mercy, to the unwanted one condemned girl is dragged into the square to die for a crime the entire court already believes she committed. But just as her fate seems sealed, she does something no one expects. She lifts her head and sings. What follows is not just a halted execution, but the unraveling of a secret buried so deep it could shake the throne itself. And when the Alpha King hears her voice, something ancient inside him awakens, something the realm was never meant to remember. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin the story. Iron Vale Square did not sound like a marketplace. It sounded like a place that had learned how to wait. Stone lay underfoot in wide, pale slabs, cold enough that the chill rose through boots and into bone. Black banners hung from the high walls, heavy cloth that did not snap in the wind so much as tilt, as if even the air had been instructed to keep its voice down. Somewhere near the center of the square, chain dragged over dry stone. In a slow, steady rhythm, neither hurried nor hesitant, the pace of a system that had done this before and would do it again. Lyra Vile was pulled into that waiting. The iron cuffs around her wrists were too tight. Not tight by accident, tight by intention. Where metal pressed, the skin had already split, and the thin line of blood that seeped down her hands dried quickly in the cold. Her dress was simple, a working thing that had never been meant for ceremony. The hem was torn, dust clung to the fabric, and when she stepped onto the open stone, she did not lift her chin the way noble women did when they wanted to be seen as brave. She simply walked. She did not struggle, she did not go soft either. There was a difference, and the guards noticed it even if they didn't have words for it. The crowd noticed too, not with outrage, not with compassion, with curiosity, the kind that never needed a reason to be cruel. A man in a dark cap leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, "She's the imposter, right?" The woman didn't take her eyes off Lyra. "Whatever she is," she whispered back, "she dies today." Lyra heard them. It wasn't that she had sharper hearing than anyone else. It was that silence carried well in a square like this, and people who thought they were safe behind numbers rarely guarded their tongues. Hands forced her down. A shove at the shoulder, a pressure at the back of her neck. She went to her knees because the stone had already decided the outcome, and she had no interest in giving the crowd a performance to chew on. Her eyes stayed forward, not searching the faces, not begging for a familiar one, not looking for a miracle, not because she didn't want one, because she had lived long enough to learn that miracles rarely came to girls whose names were easy to forget. And if there was any defiance left in her, it was quiet, so quiet it might have been mistaken for acceptance. A person pushed to the edge did not always react to impress anyone. Sometimes when everything else had been taken, only the rawest thing remained, and the rawest thing was hard to counterfeit. A robed magistrate stepped forward. His voice carried easily, practiced and flat, as if he'd been trained to make death sound administrative. "Lyra Vile, he read you stand accused of false claim to a forbidden ancient bloodline infiltration of the Alpha system and threat to the purity order that sustains the realm." A small wave moved through the crowd. Duskblood, someone muttered a slur, spoken like it was a fact. Half-breed, another voice added, "They all lie." No one demanded evidence. They didn't need it. In Iron Vale, labels worked like shackles. Once clasped, the body inside them no longer mattered. Behind the magistrate stood the council. They wore dark cloaks with the iron sigil stitched at the breast, and their faces were composed in the manner of people who believed restraint was the same thing as righteousness. They did not look at Lyra with hatred. Hatred would have required attention. They looked at her the way you looked at a crack in a wall, not with emotion, but with the awareness that if you ignored it, it would spread. They were not here to punish Lyra. They were here to protect a structure that had existed too long to tolerate questions. Above them all, high on the balcony built into the black stone of the citadel facade, the Alpha King watched. Cale Draven stood in shadow, one hand resting on the railing. He did not lean forward. He did not shift his weight. He looked carved from the same stone as the walls. His dark hair was pulled back. His face clean-shaven, his expression unreadable in the pale light. If anyone had been foolish enough to look for a flicker of emotion, they would have left disappointed. A soft step approached him. An advisor in a silver-trimmed cloak stopped a respectful distance away and spoke quietly, as if volume itself was a form of disobedience. "My king," the advisor said, "the procedure is complete." Kyle did not look at him. "Proceed," Kyle said. It was one word. It was enough to end a life. That was the most dangerous kind of power, not the kind that shouted or justified itself, but the kind that could say continue and watch the world obey. Below, the executioner stepped forward. He was built like a man who had never wasted motion in his life. His boots struck stone with certainty, the sound of someone accustomed to being the last thing a person heard. He did not snarl. He did not relish. He simply lifted the axe. The blade caught the gray light and flashed once clean and indifferent. Lyra was forced to bow her head. The crowd didn't want her to fight. Fighting would have made her interesting in the wrong way. They wanted tears, they wanted pleading, they wanted the final collapse of a person who had been declared wrong by everyone who mattered. A voice from the front called out, almost offended, "She doesn't look scared." Another answered softer, as if this was knowledge meant to settle the first man's discomfort. "Everyone is scared to die." Lyra did not speak. She did not beg. She did not call out a name. This moment mattered more than it should have, because it was the last place where she still had a choice. If she begged, she would become like every other condemned body that had knelt here before her. If she stayed silent, she would vanish as a shadow vanishes when the torch is put out. So she did something else. She lifted her head, not toward the executioner, not toward the council, not toward the balcony. She drew a breath, deep, steady, the kind of breath a person took before stepping into cold water, and she sang. The first note was small, not weak, just contained. It did not shake. It did not waver. It rose from her chest like something that had lived there a long time and had finally been given permission to exist. It wasn't a song meant for a crowd. There was no showmanship in it, no attempt to pull sympathy. It wasn't even sad in the obvious way. It felt old, as if the melody did not belong to this century or this city or this version of the world. The square began to change around it. People quieted, not because someone told them to, but because the sound made their bodies remember silence. Conversations stopped halfway through words. Heads turned. Even the horses hitched at the edge of the crowd pricked their ears and stilled. The executioner's hands paused, not fully, not like a man refusing orders, more like a man whose muscles had been interrupted by something that didn't fit the script. A young woman near the back whispered, "What is that?" No one answered because no one knew. The melody did not climb toward a clear, triumphant peak. It didn't follow the clean patterns the court musicians used when they wanted a room to applaud. It looped and dipped and returned, pulling the air, with it drawing the listener down into a place beneath thought. This was not music. This was a signal. Something aimed not at ears, but at instinct, and because of that, the first person to truly react was not the crowd. It was the Alpha King. On the balcony, Kale's shoulders locked as the second note struck the air. His pulse shifted, a hard, sudden stumble beneath his ribs. He gripped the railing without realizing he had moved. Stone bit into the pads of his fingers. His advisor turned sharply. My King Kale did not answer. Inside him, something opened. Not like a wound, like a door kicked inward in a storm. A sensation surged through his chest, familiar in the way a scent from childhood could be familiar, even if you couldn't name it. It was not a memory from his life. It was older than his life. It rose from a place he governed with iron patience, the wolf under his skin that he had trained into obedience with years of discipline. It rose now uninvited. Kyle looked down. And for the first time that morning, he did not look as a monarch watching a sentence carried out. He looked as a predator recognizing a call. A truth landed in him with cold certainty. That song did not exist. Not rare, not unusual, not permitted. He had read enough of the sealed records to know what had been erased. He had been raised on the cleaned version of history like every heir before him. He had believed the story because believing it made rule easier. But the body did not care what the council approved. The body knew Below, the executioner's axe began to fall again, his hesitation ending as training reasserted itself. Kyle's chair scraped as he pushed away from the balcony wall. He stood too fast, his cloak shifted. The advisor flinched at the sudden movement. Kyle's voice cut across the entire square. "Stop." The sound struck stone and climbed the walls. It was not shouted in panic. It was spoken in the tone Kale used when negotiation was over. The axe halted. The executioner froze with the blade suspended a handspan from Lyra's neck. A breath ran through the crowd like wind through tall grass. People stirred, confused, hungry for explanation. One council member stepped forward, his face carefully controlled. "Your Majesty, the sentence has..." Kale's gaze snapped down and the man stopped as if a hand had closed around his throat. "I have not permitted an ending," Kale said. No one dared speak after that. Lyra did not smile. She did not sag with relief. She lifted her chin and looked straight ahead as if she understood something the crowd did not, that being spared was not the same as being saved. This was a delay, a postponement of death, not a promise of life. Behind the council line, Lord Varric Halvern narrowed his eyes. Varric did not need to know the song to recognize disruption. He watched Kale, then watched the girl, and in the space of a single heartbeat, he understood that something had moved off the intended path. Something that could not be allowed to grow. That Varric murmured to the lady beside him is a crack. "What do you mean?" the lady whispered. Varric's mouth did not change shape, but his voice cooled. "I mean it needs to be sealed." Lyra was dragged to her feet. The guards did not become gentler. They simply became quicker. The girl was not free. She was just not dead. They pulled her toward the iron doors set into the base of the citadel, and the crowd erupted into questions. Why did he stop it? Who is she? Is she one of them? The council fractured into murmured arguments. Half demanded the execution resume immediately. Half insisted on investigation, if only to preserve the appearance of lawful control. Kyle did not answer any of them. He did not look at them. He watched Lyra vanish through the doors, and then he turned away from the balcony as if the square below no longer existed. A small decision made by someone with true power could open a crisis so wide the person making it didn't yet understand its shape. Kale understood enough to know he could not explain. Not yet. Explanations created vulnerabilities, and the council was full of people who lived by finding them. He moved down through the inner stairwell, his guards falling into step behind him. Their boots echoed. His advisor hurried to keep pace. "My king, the advisor," began, "the council will demand." Kale's voice was quiet and somehow more dangerous for it. "Let them demand." Why do you think that song affected the Alpha King so deeply? Why was he the only one who recognized it and stopped the execution? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear your take. And don't forget to subscribe before we jump into the most intense part of the story. He stopped outside the cell corridor and dismissed his guards with a gesture. Only one man remained, Captain Rowan Vex, his nearest and most trusted. Rowan's eyes were steady. "You want to see her alone?" Kale didn't phrase it as a question. Yes, Rowan nodded once, as if he had been told the sky was still above them. The cell was stone cold and clean in the way places of confinement always claimed to be clean. Lyra sat against the wall, wrists raw, breathing slow. The light from the corridor was weak, but it was enough to show that she had not cried. The door opened. Kyle stepped inside. No guards, no ceremony, no crown. He stood in front of her for several seconds without speaking. Lyra lifted her gaze. She didn't bow her head. She didn't avert her eyes. She looked at him like a person who had already accepted death and was now weighing a different kind of danger. Kyle finally spoke. "That song," he said. "Where did you learn it?" Lyra's voice was hoarse from the cold air and the sudden singing, but it held steady. "My mother taught me." Kyle watched her face closely, not for guilt, for something else, for the flicker of a lie, and its name I don't know. A beat of silence. Kyle asked, "Do you know what it is?" Lyra shook her head once, no. Then, as if truth demanded completion, she added, "I only know. When I sing it, I don't disappear." Something tightened in Kyle's throat. It wasn't sympathy. He had learned long ago how to keep sympathy locked away. Sympathy made a king soft in the wrong places. It was recognition not of her story, but of the shape of it. A person who had lived in the margins so long they began to believe their own erasure was normal. Kyle's gaze held hers. "You have not lied." Lyra did not reply. Her breathing remained even, but her eyes sharpened as if she were watching for the trap hidden in those words. Kyle turned as if to leave, then stopped a step away from the door. Without looking back, he said, "This is the first time today anyone has asked you who you are." Lyra's voice came soft but clear behind him. "They don't need to know who I am to kill me." Kale's hand paused on the iron latch. "You will remain here," he said, "until I decide what you are." He left before the sentence could turn into a promise. Outside, Rowan waited with the patience of a man who had been trained not to ask what his king could not yet say. Rowan's eyes flicked toward Kale's face. "Well." Kale looked down the corridor toward the stone stairs that led deeper into the citadel. "There is a question," Kale said, "bigger than her guilt." Rowan didn't press. Kale's voice came lower, almost to himself. "What is she?" Lyra sat in the dim cell long after the door closed. She did not know she had avoided death by a handspan. She did not know she had become the center of something larger than her own life. She only knew that the song still trembled faintly in her chest like an ember refusing to go out. Kyle did not return to the great hall. He went down, farther than most courtiers ever went, past the corridors where torches burned clean and the stone had been scrubbed smooth by servants, into the sealed levels where the air tasted of dust and iron and time. The ancient archive doors were carved with wolves whose eyes were set with dark stones. The lock was not a keyhole, but a deep groove shaped like a claw. Kyle pressed his palm into it and let the sharp point hidden inside pierce his skin. Blood touched stone. The groove warmed. The door released with a low, reluctant sound, as if it resented being opened. Inside the archive was not a room. It was a memory. Shelves rose into shadow, packed with records the realm pretended did not exist. The air smelled of old parchment dried ink and the faint sweetness of herbs used to keep rot away. The silence here was different than the silence in the square. This silence was not waiting. It was hiding. Magister Elowen Reese stood at the central table as if she had been there all morning, hands folded, posture composed. Her hair was bound tightly at the nape of her neck, and her eyes held the sharpness of a person who had spent her life reading what others feared. She did not bow. She simply said, "You heard it?" Kale stopped at the table. Not heard, he corrected, recognized. Elowen's gaze flicked once a tiny acknowledgement of the difference. "Then you know why it matters." Kyle set his hand on the cold stone table. "Tell me." Elowen pulled a thick ledger toward her and opened it to a section where the ink had faded and the margins were marked with old heavy strokes, censoring marks. In places, entire paragraphs had been scraped away until the parchment fibers showed. She pointed to a line that remained. "Pre-alpha blood," she read aloud, "existing before the hierarchy was established." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Explain." Elowen did carefully, like a scholar moving through a minefield. "Not wolf as we know it," she said. "Not human. A strain that existed before the alpha system split the packs into rank and order. The records describe them as original." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "Original can mean many things." Elowen's voice stayed steady. "Original in the sense that their presence affected alphas. Not by dominance, but by something older. The texts call it the call." Kale felt his fingers curl slightly against the table. "A call." Elowen nodded. "A sound, a resonance. It bypasses thought. It touches instinct directly." Kyle stared at the ledger. That is why you reacted," Elowen finished. "Because if that girl carries even a diluted fragment of that blood, your body would recognize it even if your mind refuses to." Kyle's gaze lifted to her. "Then why does no one speak of this strain now?" Elowen did not soften her voice when she answered. "Because it was erased." Kyle held very still. Elowen turned the page. Much of it had been destroyed, but a few lines remained like bones after fire. "Too dangerous to exist," she read. "Uncontrollable. Must be eliminated to preserve alpha order." Kyle's eyes moved over the words. He did not react immediately, but something in him shifted quietly, decisively like stone, cracking under slow pressure. This isn't myth, Alowin said. Kale's voice came rougher than before. It's edited history. Alowin met his gaze without flinching. Yes. Kale looked away toward the shadowed shelves, and now it returns. Alowin did not say yes. She did not say no. Instead, she said, now we find out if it was ever truly gone. Lyra was brought to a chamber that looked nothing like a torture room, that in its own way frightened her more. The walls were warm stone, the floor covered in dark rugs, the air scented faintly with clean herbs. There was a bed in the corner and a basin of water with cloths folded beside it. There were no shackles in the wall, only Magister Alowin and 2 attendants whose faces did not show emotion. Lyra stood by the door, wrists still red, and said, "What is this Alowin studied her the way a physician studied a wound? A room for examination." Lyra gave a short, humorless breath. "So you can find a better reason to kill me." Alowin's eyes narrowed slightly, not in offense, but in consideration. "If I wanted you dead, you would not have left the square." Lyra held her gaze. That was the king. "Yes," Alowin said, "and you should understand something about him. He does not stop death for entertainment." Lyra didn't respond to that because it sounded like praise, and she did not trust praise from people who lived behind stone. Alowin moved closer. "Sit." Lyra did not sit. "Tell me what you're looking for." Elowin's voice stayed calm. "We are looking for what you are." Lyra's mouth tightened. "I'm the girl you were going to execute." Elowin stepped to the table and laid out tools, not blades, but instruments. A thin needle, a small vial, a strip of metal, etched with runes that faintly shimmered. Lyra's shoulders tensed. "And if you find your answer." Elowin glanced toward the door where Kale stood just inside the threshold. Lyra had not heard him enter. That should have been impossible, but nothing about him obeyed normal rules. Kale's voice was quiet. "Then we decide what happens next." Lyra's eyes held his. "You decide." Kyle did not deny it. "Yes." Lyra swallowed. Her fear was there, sharp and real, but beneath it was something else, the sudden realization that not knowing herself might be the most dangerous weakness she had ever carried. Alowin spoke again, bringing the room back to its purpose. "Your body's response will tell us more than your words." Lyra's laugh was brief. "My body has been telling me I'm tired for years." No one listened. Kyle's gaze remained on her. "I am listening." The words landed harder than they should have. Lyra looked away first, not because she wanted to, but because her chest had tightened in a way she did not understand. Alowin began the examination. She checked Lyra's pulse and found it steady, even after fear. She pressed 2 fingers to Lyra's throat and said, "Your heart is strong." Lyra's reply came automatic flat. "It has to be." Alowin moved a strip of rune-etched metal near Lyra's skin. The air around it warmed. Lyra felt a strange pull, like the tug of the tide. Her breath caught. Elowin's eyes sharpened. "You feel that." Lyra forced her breathing even. "I feel something." Elowin glanced toward Kale as if confirming a suspicion. Then she turned back to Lyra. "Your composition is not human." Lyra's throat tightened. "And not wolf." Elowin's answer was quiet. "No." Lyra stared at her. "So what am I?" Elowin did not answer immediately. She looked to Kyle again. Kyle's jaw worked once as if he were grinding a thought down to a shape he could speak. "We do not know yet," Kale said. Lyra's mouth twitched in a smile that held no joy. "So I don't even get a name for it." Alowin's gaze softened by a fraction, still not warmth, but the absence of coldness. "Not having a name is dangerous?" Lyra looked at her, surprised by the bluntness. Alowin continued, "When people cannot name something, they label it. And labels are easier to kill." Lyra breathed in slowly. "Then give me a name." Alowin's answer was honest. "We cannot." Lyra's voice dropped. "So I'm still the same thing I was this morning." Kyle's gaze stayed on her. "No." Lyra snapped her eyes to him. "Then what am I?" Kyle's voice was low. A question. It was not comforting, but it was real. And in a world built on lies polished into law, reality mattered. Lyra was returned to her cell, later her wrists wrapped in clean cloth, her body exhausted. For the first time since the square, she did not only think about dying, she thought about herself, about the way her mother flinched at the moon, about the nights she had been told not to sing, about the way they had moved from settlement to settlement as if something followed them. Lyra pressed her head back against the stone and whispered into the dark, "Mother, what did you bury inside me?" No one answered, but the question did not leave. Chaol returned to the archive. He and Elowen went through records until the torches burned low. Each page felt like a confession scraped half away. The more Chaol read, the clearer one truth became. The realm's order was built on a foundation that had been violently corrected. Elowen spoke quietly as she turned a page. They feared what they could not control. Kyle's gaze was fixed on the ledger. They feared losing power. Elowen didn't disagree. She simply said, "History is written by the survivors. Sometimes the survivors are the ones who did the killing." Kyle did not answer, because answering would have meant admitting that his crown was inherited from that killing. When he finally left the archive, it was not to return to court. It was to return to the girl in the cell. He told himself it was to gather information. He told himself he needed answers. But when he stood outside her cell door in the quiet corridor, he realized something unsettling. He did not want to leave her alone in the dark. That was not a king's concern. That was something else. He entered without guards. Lyra looked up immediately, as if she had been waiting for the sound of his steps. "You're back?" she said. Chaol's voice was controlled. "Yes." Lyra tilted her head. To ask more questions, Chaol watched her for a long moment. Then he said no. Lyra blinked once, thrown off balance. "Then why are you here?" Chaol's mouth opened, then closed. A rare thing happened. He did not have an answer. He trusted. "I don't know," he admitted. Lyra stared at him as if she were trying to decide whether the admission was real or another trap. Then very softly she said, "You don't come down here without a reason." Kyle's gaze held hers. "Apparently I do." Lyra did not smile, but something in her eyes shifted. A fraction, like a door left slightly ajar. Kyle asked after a pause, "When did you learn the song?" Lyra's voice went distant. "When I was too young to understand words." Kyle watched her hands, the bandages, the dried blood under her nails. "You weren't taught it to entertain." Lyra's laugh was quiet. "No, my mother didn't have time for entertainment." Kyle's voice came low. "What did she say about it?" Lyra hesitated. Then, because she seemed incapable of bending truth, she said, "She told me not to sing it where strangers could hear. She said, if I ever sang it in public, it meant I had nothing left to lose." Kyle felt something tighten again in his chest. Lyra looked at him and asked, "Why did you stop it?" Chaol's answer came before he could shape it into something safe. "Because that song does not belong to the story we tell ourselves." Lyra's brow creased. What story? Chaol did not answer. Lyra's voice dropped. "Do you think I'm guilty?" Chaol's eyes held hers. "I think you don't know enough to be guilty of what they accuse you of." Lyra breathed out. It was not relief. It was exhaustion. Chaol asked, "Are you afraid?" Lyra's answer was immediate. "Yes." Chaol nodded slowly as if he respected the honesty. Lyra added, "But not of you." Kyle's gaze sharpened. Then what Lyra looked away towards the thin line of light under the door. "I'm afraid of being erased," she said, "of vanishing like I never existed, of dying and having no one ever speak my name again." Kyle's throat worked once. He had stood in front of armies. He had signed orders that changed the fate of thousands. He had watched men kneel and beg and had never once let it touch his face. But this quiet fear spoken plainly hid a place in him that had been sealed. He left the cell without saying what he should have said. He left before the feeling could turn into something he could not govern. And yet, even as he walked away, he could still feel her presence in his mind like a fixed point. As if the distance between them was no longer measured only in stone and corridors, the council met without him. Of course they did. They met in the inner chamber where the walls were thick and the air always smelled faintly of burning herbs. Varric stood near the center, hands clasped behind his back, his face arranged into something that looked like concern. "We cannot keep her," Varric said, voice smooth. "A duskblood within the citadel is a threat by definition." An elder with white hair nodded. "The law is clear." Another lord leaned forward. "The Alpha King stopped the execution. That alone." "That alone," Varric interrupted gently, "is why we must act quickly. His Majesty is affected." A murmur moved through the chamber. Seraphine Valcrest, seated with perfect posture, spoke softly, her voice refined enough to cut without raising volume. "A person who does not belong in a system," she said, "should not be given the opportunity to change it." The words sounded reasonable. That was how cruelty survived in court, by dressing itself in logic. Aldrich Thorne listened without expression. He had served Chaol long enough to recognize the shape of a storm before it broke. When the meeting ended, Aldrich went to find his king. He found Chaol in his private study, standing at the window like a man who had forgotten what chairs were for. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, "they are pressing for a decision." Kyle's eyes did not move from the courtyard below. "Let them press." Aldrich stepped closer. "This cannot remain unresolved. The longer she stays alive, the more dangerous it becomes politically." Kyle's voice was quiet. "Is she dangerous?" Aldrich hesitated, a mistake, because hesitation was an answer. Kyle turned. "Is she dangerous?" Aldrich chose truth. "I don't know." Kyle nodded once, a clipped movement that meant nothing and everything. Aldrich continued. "But the council will not tolerate uncertainty. They will move." Kale's jaw tightened. "They will not move without my permission." Aldrich met his gaze. "They will try." Kyle's voice dropped. "Then they will fail." Aldrich's expression did not change, but the tension around his mouth did. "You are delaying." Kale's eyes narrowed. "I am deciding." "No," Aldrich said softly, "you are hesitating." Kyle said nothing. Because if he spoke, he might admit that his hesitation had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the girl who had sung on her knees and made the wolf inside him answer. Kyle returned to Lyra again. He told himself he needed to know more before he made the decision that would shape the realm. But when he stepped into the cell and saw her sitting with her back to the wall, bruised wrists wrapped in cloth, eyes too steady for someone who had been almost killed that morning, he understood the truth. He had come back because he could not stop. Lyra looked up. "You keep doing that," she said. "Doing what Kyle asked." "Coming," Lyra said. "Like you're checking whether I'm still here." Kyle held her gaze. Lyra's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Are you going to kill me when you know enough?" The question landed clean with no drama around it. Kyle did not answer. For the first time in years, he found himself without the protection of certainty. Lyra continued, "I'm not asking you to spare me. I just want to know what kind of death to prepare for." Kale's throat tightened. "I have not decided." Lyra's eyes did not soften. "So it's possible." Kyle said nothing because denying it would have been dishonest. Lyra looked away for a moment, then back. "What did you feel when I sang?" Kale's posture stiffened. That was not a question a prisoner asked a king. That was not a question a king answered. Lyra held his gaze without blinking. Kale's voice came low. "A memory I do not own." Lyra's breath caught slightly, as if she understood the meaning, even if she didn't understand the mechanics. She nodded once. "So I'm not crazy." Kale's eyes narrowed. "You thought you were Lyra's laugh was thin. When everyone tells you you're a lie, you start wondering if you're made of one." Kyle stood very still. He wanted to tell her something that would anchor her. But kings did not offer anchors to girls on trial. Kings offered sentences, so he said only rest. Lyra's voice followed him as he turned to leave. "If you decide I have to die," she said, "at least let me sing again." Kyle stopped at the door. He did not look back. He said no. Lyra's voice sharpened. No, Kale's answer was rough. "If you sing again in that square, there will be no returning to what was." Lyra went silent. And in that silence, Kale understood with frightening clarity that he was not protecting the realm from her. He was protecting the realm from the truth her voice carried. That night, Varric moved. It was not a dramatic thing. It did not come with horns or banners. It came with paper. A document sealed with the council's mark, forged well enough to fool most guards, slipped into the hands of men who understood that the easiest way to destroy a threat was to remove it before the king could claim it. Lanterns burned low in the corridor when the cell door opened. Lyra lifted her head immediately. 2 guards stepped in. Their faces were neutral in the way faces became when men were doing something they did not want to name, Stand, one said. Lyra's hands tightened on her knees. "Where are you taking me by order of the council?" The guard replied. Lyra's heart hit her ribs once hard. "The council doesn't come to the cells at night," she said quietly. The guard's eyes flickered. That was all the confirmation she needed. She rose anyway, not because she trusted them, because fighting in a corridor with chained wrists was a way to die without answers. They let her out. As they moved, Lyra watched the turns, the passages, the slope of the floors. This was not the route to an official chamber. This was a route meant to avoid witnesses. A wrongness settled into her stomach. She kept her voice steady. "Am I being transferred?" "Yes," the guard said. To where the guard did not answer. Lyra's breath slowed. She felt the cold, familiar clarity that came when fear became inevitable. They passed a window and she caught her reflection in the dark glass, pale face-bound wrists, a girl who looked like a rumor about to be erased. In the distance, a door opened. A third man waited. He wore no citadel uniform. His cloak was brown, rough, the kind worn by mercenaries. Lyra's blood went colder. The guard said too casually, "Keep moving." Lyra stopped. "No," she said. The first guard's hand shot out, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "Move," he hissed. Lyra's eyes flashed. "This isn't a transfer." The guard's grip tightened. "You don't get to decide what this is." Lyra's chest rose. She did not scream. She did not plead. She said the only true thing she had. "Cale will find out." The mercenary laughed quietly. "That's why we're doing it now." And then Lyra was shoved forward down the corridor into the dark. By morning, the story had already been written. It spread through the citadel like smoke through a cracked door. Lyra Vale had poisoned the Alpha King. Lyra Vale was a spy. Lyra Vale was removed for the safety of the realm. The narrative was complete motive, accusation, conclusion. And the beauty of a complete narrative was that it didn't require reality. Cale returned to the cells just after dawn. He had not slept. He told himself he was coming to finalize the decision to bring closure before the council forced his hand. But the moment he stepped into the corridor, he knew something was wrong. The air smelled empty. The door to Lyra's cell stood ajar. Kyle stopped. Rowan appeared behind him without a sound. "My king." Kyle's voice was flat. "Open it." Rowan pushed the door fully. The cell was bare, no girl, no blanket, no breath. Kyle stood very still. For a heartbeat, his mind refused to accept it, as if disbelief could protect him from what his instincts already knew. Then Aldrich's footsteps came fast down the corridor. He took one look inside the cell and his face tightened. "She's gone." Kyle turned his head slowly. "Who authorized removal?" Aldrich swallowed once. "The council claims it was necessary." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "Claims," Aldrich hesitated. "They say she poisoned you." That she was a threat, and Cale's voice cut through the words like a blade. "She did not poison me." Aldrich's jaw clenched. "I know." Cale's gaze hardened. "Then tell me where they took her." Aldrich's voice came low. "We believe to a holding fortress beyond Greywood. Varick's influence runs strong there." Cale did not breathe for a second. Rowan watched him carefully, as if bracing for a storm. Aldrich stepped forward. "Your Majesty, you need to consider." Cale's head snapped toward him. "Consider what." Aldrich's voice tightened. "If you go after her personally, you declare war on the council." Kyle's lips parted slightly. It might have been a laugh if there had been anything humorous left in him. "I did not start this," Kyle said. Aldrich pressed quieter now. "They want you to choose the realm over her." Kyle's eyes flicked back to the empty cell. His voice dropped to something that felt like a confession. "I already chose," he said. Aldrich's breath hitched. "Then you know what it costs." Kyle turned fully. His expression was not rage. It was something more terrifying, a calm that had decided it no longer cared about approval. He asked one question, and it was the question of a man who had stopped pretending. "Where is she?" No title, no policy, no council, just a nameless need. Aldrich met his gaze, and for the first time in 20 years of service, there was fear in his eyes, not fear of Cale's anger, but fear of what Cale was about to become. "She's beyond Greywood," Aldrich said. 2 hours by hard ride, maybe less. Kyle turned to Rowan. "Prepare horses." Rowan nodded instantly. How many? Kyle's answer was simple. "Enough." Aldrich stepped in front of him, voice urgent. "Your Majesty, you are not fully recovered." Whatever was in that cup, Kyle walked past him as if Aldrich were a shadow on the wall. "Then I will recover on the way," Kyle said. He did not look back, because looking back was how people convinced themselves to stay within the rules that were killing what mattered. Kyle rode as if the world had stopped being wide, as if there were only one line left in it, one line he could not afford to lose. The empty cell stayed behind his eyes like an afterimage. The door half open, the cold stone, the absence where a person had been. He had walked into war tents with less certainty than he carried now, and that knowledge should have frightened him. It would have once, before a girl sang at the edge of a blade and made the wolf inside him lift its head. He had always believed control was the price of power, that an alpha king was only as strong as his ability to hold back what he wanted. He had worn discipline like armor layer after layer until even he forgot what it felt like to breathe without it. But control had failed him in the simplest way. It had made him slow. Aldrich had followed him to the eastern gate, cloak thrown over his shoulders in haste. His face tight with the kind of worry men wore when they saw their king stepping off a cliff and understood there would be no rope. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, keeping his voice low because the walls had ears and the night had too many watchers. If the council truly authorized this, Cale did not look at him. "If they truly did?" Cale said, "Then they have already declared what they think of my authority." Aldrich's breath came out through his nose. "And if they did not," Cale's hand tightened on the reins, "then someone forged my realm into a weapon." They reached the gate. No banners, no trumpets, no escort fit for a monarch. The iron doors opened with a groan that sounded like disapproval, and Kyle took it as a fitting commentary on the night. He had spent years teaching Iron Veil to trust his restraint. Tonight, he would teach it something else. Captain Rowan Vex waited with 3 mounted guards. His posture was straight, his jaw set, his eyes alert in the torchlight. Rowan had been Cale's shadow through too many threats to ask questions that could not change the answer. Rowan inclined his head. "My king." Cale swung into the saddle without ceremony. "We ride north." Rowan's gaze flicked to Aldrich. "With how many enough?" Kyle said. Rowan's mouth tightened slightly, as if he understood that enough was not a number. It was a mood. He nodded once. "Then we move now." They moved. The citadel fell away behind them into darkness, and the land beyond the walls opened into a cold, bare stretch of winter grass and rock. The moon hung thin, pale as bone, a sliver that looked sharper than it should have. The wind came in low gusts, carrying the scent of distant pine and something else, iron smoke and the faintest trace of fear. Cale let it fill his lungs. He did not need a map. He did not need a scout. He needed only the pull. Rowan rode beside him for a while, silent, then finally spoke. "We're tracking her." Cale's eyes stayed forward. "Yes." Rowan hesitated. "By scent." Kyle's voice was clipped. "Not only by scent." Rowan swallowed whatever he had been about to say. He had seen bond marks in other packs. He had watched alphas lose sleep because their mates were injured miles away, and their bodies knew it before their minds could accept it. But Cale had never taken a mate. Cale had never allowed anyone close enough to become that kind of weakness. Cale had never allowed it until now. A gust hit sharp and sudden. Cale's horse shifted under him, and Kyle paused, half a breath without meaning to. The world narrowed. His lungs tightened. His senses sharpened like claws drawing out. Rowan noticed immediately. "What is it?" Kyle closed his eyes for a heartbeat. It wasn't a thought, it wasn't logic, it was a sensation as certain as gravity. "She's north," Kyle said. Rowan stared at him. "How do you know?" Kyle opened his eyes. The night looked different now, edges clearer distance, less abstract, the land threaded with invisible trails. "I feel it," Kyle said. Rowan's voice dropped. "That isn't normal." Kyle's answer was flat. I never said it was. He drove his heels in and the horse surged forward. It was no longer pursuit. It was being pulled towards something inevitable, and perhaps that was the most unsettling part. Kale did not feel like he was choosing anymore. He felt like he was finally catching up to a decision his body had already made. Lyra's world had shrunk to stone and torchlight. The holding room in Greywood Fortress was small, windowless, with a single iron ring set into the wall that had been used for so many wrists that the stone around it was smoothed by desperation. The air tasted of damp rock and old smoke. A torch burned in a bracket, its flames steady in different casting shadows that moved like living things. Her hands were tied behind her back. The rope bit into skin already bruised from iron cuffs. A cut stung on her cheek where someone's ring had caught her, a shallow line that bled and then dried and now burned whenever she moved. She sat on the floor because standing would have been a performance, and she had learned early that performance was what men demanded before they decided whether to show mercy. She had no mercy to purchase tonight. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Two men came in, neither wearing the Citadel uniform. Their cloaks were rough, their boots caked with mud. Mercenaries, Varric's kind. Men who did not need law as long as they had permission. One of them glanced at her like she was an object. "What are you?" he asked, as if the question itself could bruise her. Lyra's throat was dry. "I don't know." The slap cracked across the room. Her head snapped to the side. Pain flared bright, immediate, then settled into a hot throb. "Say it again," the man hissed. Lyra turned her face back slowly. She did not blink fast. She did not lower her gaze. "I don't know," she repeated. No scream, no pleading, only truth again. The man's jaw flexed. He hated that. Men always hated when they could not force a person to participate in their version of reality. "He changed tactic. You poisoned the Alpha King." Lyra's voice was steady. "No. You infiltrated the council. No. You're a threat to the realm." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "If I were what you think I am, you wouldn't be asking." The room went still. For a second, the mercenary's eyes flickered with something like uncertainty. Then his pride slammed back into place like a door. He grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. "Careful," he whispered near her ear, breath sour. "You're not special, you're just inconvenient." Lyra's fingers curled against the rope behind her. She did not cry out. She would not give him that. When he released her, her scalp burned. The torch crackled. Lyra stared at the floor and thought, not for the first time, that the most dangerous thing about a system was not that it punished you. It was that it demanded your agreement first. It demanded you admit you were wrong, that you deserved it, that you had no right to exist. And Lyra could not do that, even if it killed her. Outside the door in the corridor, Lord Varric Halvern listened, as if he were evaluating a piece of faulty machinery. A soldier approached him nervous. "She won't confess." Varric did not look annoyed. Annoyance was too honest. "She doesn't need to confess." Varric said, voice smooth as polished stone. "She needs to disappear." The soldier hesitated. If the king finds out, Varric's gaze slid toward him and the soldier fell silent. By the time the king finds out, Varric murmured, "It will be too late. That is the entire point." He walked away, his steps measured, as if he were leaving a dinner party rather than ordering a death. Because that was how people like Varric survived. They treated cruelty like administration. Greywood Fortress rose out of the forest like a clenched fist. Tall stone walls, narrow windows, thick gates, torches at the battlements that burned without warmth. Kale saw it long before they reached it, a dark outline against darker trees. The land here was rougher, the air wetter, thick with pine and river and the metallic tang of iron. Soldiers moved along the walls in slow patrols, confident in their isolation. Rowan slowed his horse beside Kale. "We should wait for reinforcements." Kale did not take his eyes off the walls. No. Rowan kept his voice calm. "Even a king bleeds." Kale's jaw tightened. "Then I will bleed quickly." Rowan exhaled. "At least give me a plan." Kale finally turned his head slightly, and in the low light, Rowan saw the change in his king's face. Calm, yes, but not the calm of restraint. the calm of certainty that no longer cared about consequence. "The plan," Kale said, "is to go in." Rowan stared at him, then nodded once. Understood. They dismounted in the trees, leaving the horses hidden among brush. Kyle moved with a quiet efficiency that told Rowan this wasn't rage. Rage was messy. Rage made noise. This was control on a different frequency. Rowan signaled the guards, and they moved like shadows, slipping through the outer perimeter where the forest met stone. A guard tower stood near the west wall. Two men watched, bored, their attention drifting to their hands and the cold. Rowan approached from behind and cut the first man's breath short before he could make a sound. The second turned too late. A fist to the throat, a blade at the ribs. The body folded silently to the ground. Kyle did not pause to look. He didn't need to. The scent was stronger now. Blood, smoke. And Lyra, faint but unmistakable, like the last note of a song still trembling in the air after the singer had fallen silent. They reached the main gate. Rowan leaned close. Too thick, too many. Kale's eyes lifted to the battlement, then to the narrow service door set into the side wall. A smaller access used for supplies, less guarded, built with the complacency of men who believed no one would dare. Kyle's hand flexed. He walked to that door and placed his palm against the wood. Rowan blinked. "My king," Kale's voice was quiet. "Stand back." He hit the door once, not with a shoulder like a man, with force like something beneath skin. The wood splintered. The iron latch ripped free. The door swung inward. Rowan's eyes widened a fraction. Then he moved fast because awe was useless in a fight. Inside the corridor was narrow and damp. Torches burned in brackets. The air smelled of old stone and fresh fear. Footsteps, shouts. Rowan raised his blade. Now. They moved. Kyle was ahead, silent and swift. A soldier rounded the corner and saw them, mouth opening to yell. Kale closed the distance in 2 steps and hit him in the throat with the edge of his hand. The man collapsed, choking weapon clattering. Another soldier lunged. Kyle sidestepped, caught the man's wrist, and twisted until bone gave. The soldier screamed, and Rowan slammed him into the wall to cut the sound off. They didn't have time for prolonged battle. Kale had not come to conquer Greywood. He had come to retrieve what had been taken. He followed the pull through twisting corridors downstairs where the air grew colder and the scent grew stronger. His senses sharpened until every stone detail registered the salt of sweat, the rust of iron bars, the stale breath of men who lived too close to fear. Then he stopped. A door, thick iron, a small viewing slit. Behind it, heartbeats, one steady but elevated, the familiar cadence of a human body refusing to break. Lyra. Kyle's body locked. Rowan murmured, "This is it." Kyle did not answer. He planted his foot and kicked. The door bent inward with a violent groan. Inside, torchlight spilled over stone walls, over a figure on the floor with her head bowed, wrists bound behind her back. Lyra lifted her gaze slowly. For a second, her face did not move, as if her mind could not allow itself to hope. Then her eyes found his, and she said, "Not your majesty, not Alpha King." Just one word, raw, honest, impossible to mistake. Kyle. It wasn't pleading. It was recognition. That single sound collapsed months of distance Kyle had tried to maintain. It broke the last remaining line between king and prisoner, between ruler and girl on a stone floor. Kale took one step, then another, and dropped to a knee in front of her. He reached out without thinking. His fingers touched her cheek where the cut lay thin and angry against pale skin. No gloves, no measured distance. A human touch. Lyra's breath caught. Kale's voice was low, rough in a way it had never been in court. "Who did this to you?" Lyra swallowed. "Varric." The name landed like a bell struck in a quiet hall. Kyle's jaw tightened. He studied her face, the bruises, the rope marks. His gaze moved down to her wrists, to the raw skin where the rope had bitten. The wolf in him surged, furious, ancient. But Kale did not lose control into mindless violence. He made a different decision. He looked at her and said with cold clarity, "I will not let them erase you." Lyra's eyes widened slightly. She did not ask what he meant. She didn't need to, because she had been living her whole life as something people tried to erase quietly, socially, economically, and now literally. Kale shifted, pulled a knife from his belt, and cut the rope at her wrists himself. His hands were steady. That steadiness mattered. Lyra flexed her fingers, wincing. Rowan stood at the doorway, blade in hand, scanning the corridor. "We have to go," Rowan said. Cal didn't look away from Lyra. "Can you walk, Lyra?" Drew a breath and nodded once. Yes. Her voice was hoarse, but it held that same stubbornness that had made her sing in the square rather than disappear. Kyle slid an arm under her elbows and helped her stand. She swayed, then steadied herself. Lyra looked at him, eyes searching. "You came," she said. Kyle's expression did not soften, but something in his gaze was unguarded. "Yes," Lyra swallowed. "You didn't have to." Kyle held her gaze. He did not lie. "I didn't," he said, a heartbeat. Then he added quieter, "But I did." Lyra's eyes flickered. Something shifted in her expression, like a wall deciding to lower by a fraction. Kyle leaned closer, not to kiss, not to claim, but to anchor. "Stay with me," he said. Lyra's lips parted. For a moment she looked like she might argue out of habit, out of pride, out of fear that dependence was a trap. Then she whispered, barely audible, "I'm trying." Kyle's hand slid to the back of her neck for a brief second, a touch so light it was almost nothing, but Lyra felt it like warmth. Rowan's voice sharpened. "Incoming." Footsteps thundered in the corridor, men shouting, steel scraping stone. Kyle turned his head, eyes narrowing. He handed Lyra to Rowan without looking away. Rowan caught her with surprising gentleness and moved her behind him. "Stay behind me," Rowan said to Lyra. Lyra's voice came strained but calm. "I know how to survive." Rowan almost smiled. "Good. Then survive quietly." The first soldier appeared at the doorway, weapon raised, eyes wild. He froze when he saw Kale. Recognition hit him like a blow. "Your Majesty." Kale did not give him time to speak. He moved forward, struck the man's wrist, took the weapon, and shoved him back into the corridor with enough force to drop him hard. Another soldier lunged. Kyle drove the stolen blade into the wall beside the man's head, close enough that the sound of metal biting stone made the soldier flinch. Kyle's voice was cold. "Move." The soldier stumbled backward, shaking. He did not want to die in a corridor against his king. That was another kind of fear. Kale looked past him down the corridor, where more men gathered, hesitating. He spoke loudly enough for all of them to hear. "Step aside," he ordered, "or become part of the crime." No one moved for a heartbeat. Then slowly a path opened. Not out of loyalty, out of instinct, out of the deep ingrained knowledge that an Alpha King's wrath was not something you survived by bravery. You survived it by not standing in its way. Kyle turned back to Lyra. "Now," he said. They moved. Rowan guided Lyra through the corridor, keeping her close to the wall. Kyle walked ahead, a quiet storm that made men press themselves into corners. They reached the service door and slipped into the cold air. Behind them, the fortress erupted into frantic motion, but it was too late. Lyra was already out of their hands. And the moment she crossed the threshold into the forest, Kale felt something in his chest settle into place, heavy and certain, like a lock turning. He had done it. He had crossed the line. There was no returning to the king he had been yesterday. They rode hard. Lyra sat behind Kyle, arms wrapped around his waist because her body had no choice. She kept her forehead close to his back, eyes half closed against the wind. Every jolt sent pain through her wrists, but she didn't complain. She had learned not to waste words on pain. Rowan rode ahead, scanning the path, and the guards spread out behind them, watching for pursuit. For the first hour, no one spoke. The silence was not heavy like the cell's silence. It was focused. It was the silence of people moving toward a consequence. Lyra finally lifted her head enough to speak near Kale's ear. "You were poisoned," she said. Kale's shoulders tensed slightly. "How do you know?" he asked. Lyra's voice was low. "They told me when they wanted me to confess. They said I did it. They said the proof was in your blood." Kyle's mouth tightened. They needed a story. Lyra's grip around him tightened slightly. "And you," Kale's voice was quiet. "I needed you alive." Lyra went still at that. In the darkness, she looked at the side of his face, hard line of jaw, eyes forward, posture unbending. "You shouldn't," she said softly. Cal did not ask what she meant. He understood. The system had trained them both. It had trained her to disappear. It had trained him to never need. Needing was dangerous in a world built on power. Cal's answer was blunt. I do. Lyra swallowed. After a moment, she said, You're not afraid of the council. Cal's laugh, if it could be called that, was a single exhale. No. Lyra hesitated. Then, what are you afraid of? Kyle didn't answer immediately, and Lyra thought he might not. He had been raised to keep his fears locked behind stone. But tonight he had already broken too many rules to pretend he still cared about keeping the old ones. Kyle's voice was low, almost to himself. Losing you, he said. Lyra's breath caught. For a second, she could not find a response that didn't feel like stepping onto thin ice. She finally whispered, You don't even know what I am. Kyle's grip on the reins tightened. I know what you are not, he said. You are not a lie. Lyra closed her eyes. The wind burned. The stars wheeled overhead. The forest passed in dark blurs. And for the first time in her life, Lyra felt something she had not allowed herself to want. Not safety, not comfort. Recognition. To be seen and not turned away from. Ironvale's gates rose out of the night like a judgment waiting to be delivered. Torches burned bright along the walls. Too bright. The kind of brightness used when men expected trouble. Rowan slowed his horse and rode up beside Kyle. They're waiting, Rowan said. Kyle's jaw tightened. I know. Lyra's arms tightened around him. They won't accept me. Kyle's voice was calm. I don't need them to accept you. Lyra stared at him. That's not how this works. Kyle glanced back over his shoulder, eyes dark. It is now. They rode through the gates. No cheers, no welcome. Only the stare of guards who did not know whether to kneel or reach for weapons. Kyle dismounted first, then helped Lyra down. His hand remained at her elbow an extra second, steadying her, making it clear to anyone watching that she was not being dragged. She was not a prisoner. She was with him. That single fact spread through the courtyard faster than any messenger could run. Servants froze. Soldiers shifted. Whispers began like a distant rustle of leaves. Kyle walked straight toward the great hall. Lyra followed at his side. Every instinct in her screamed that this was wrong, that she should be behind him hidden, that she should make herself small. But Kyle did not place her behind him. He placed her beside him, and by doing so, he forced the entire palace to witness something it had not prepared for an alpha king walking with a condemned girl as if she belonged. The doors opened. The great hall waited. Inside, the air was thick with heat and expectation. High stone pillars rose into darkness. Firelight from dozens of torches reflected off polished floors and carved wolf emblems. The space was vast, but it felt crowded because every eye in it was sharpened with intent. The council stood in a semicircle. No one sat. Lords from outer regions were gathered near the front, their cloaks rich, their faces tight with skepticism. Noble women held themselves like statues. Seraphine Valcrest stood in perfect composure, hands folded expression, arranged to look concerned rather than threatened. Varric Halvorn stood near the center. He did not look surprised to see Kyle. He had expected confrontation. But when Lyra walked in at Kale's side, Varric's eyes narrowed a fraction. A crack, Kyle thought. Good. A voice from the crowd whispered he brought her. Another answered he brought her beside him. Seraphine's fingers tightened minutely around her glove, the only betrayal of her reaction. Varric stepped forward, hands behind his back, voice smooth. My King Varric said loud enough for the hall. Before you speak, we must establish what has occurred. Kyle did not reply. Varric continued, tone calm, as if he were delivering a polite report. This girl is Duskblood. She infiltrated the Alpha system. She is a threat to the purity order that sustains our realm. He lifted his chin. And last night she poisoned you. A murmur ran through the hall. Lyra's stomach clenched. It was astonishing how quickly a lie became reality when spoken in the right room. Kyle looked at Varric without visible anger. That was the thing about Kale's rage. It did not burn hot on the surface. It froze. She did not poison me, Kale said. Silence fell sharp. A council elder cleared his throat. Your Majesty, The evidence? Kale's gaze snapped to him and the elder went still. I do not require evidence, Kale said, to know who touched my cup. A ripple of unease moved through the lords. Kyle took one step forward, Lyra still beside him, and the hall seemed to shrink around that movement. She is not what you think, Kale continued. His voice did not rise. He did not perform. He spoke plainly, and that plainness carried a different kind of power than ceremony ever could. You call her Duskblood, Kale said. You call her corruption. I call her the thing you tried to erase. Varric's mouth remained smooth. Your Majesty, we did what was necessary. The order, Kale cut him off. You did what was convenient. A hush fell deeper than before. Kyle lifted his hand. Rowan stepped forward and placed a bound ledger on the stone dais, an ancient archive record. Its cover cracked, the ink faded the margins marked with censor strokes. A gasp went through the council. One elder's face drained of color. That record, the elder said, voice shaking slightly, is sealed. Kale's eyes were ice. It was sealed because it tells the truth. He opened the ledger. He did not read every word. He did not need to. He looked up and said the sentence that would fracture the hall. This bloodline existed before the Alpha hierarchy. The hall erupted into whispers. No, someone breathed. Impossible, another hissed. Kyle waited, not patiently, simply long enough for the noise to exhaust itself. Then he spoke again. Not impossible, Kyle said, just inconvenient to remember. He turned his gaze directly to Varric. Our ancestors destroyed them, Kale said, not because they were evil, because they could not be controlled. A silence spread outward as if someone had poured cold water over the room. This was the twist the hall had not prepared for. It was one thing to argue over a condemned girl. It was another to be told the foundation of the entire system was built on a deliberate slaughter. When a system survived on a lie, truth was not a solution. Truth was a threat. Varric's voice remained smooth, but a hard edge entered it. Even if that were true, she remains a danger. The realm cannot be shaped around a relic of chaos. Kale did not look at him. He looked at Lyra. That small movement mattered more than a speech, because it showed where Kale's attention truly was. Lyra's throat tightened. She felt the weight of the hall's gaze like hands. Kyle's voice softened, not into tenderness, but into something more intimate certainty. She does not need forgiveness, Kale said. The hall froze. Kale's eyes lifted back to the council. Because I never condemned her, Kale said. A shock ran through the room, visible on faces that had never expected the king to say something so simple and so final. Kyle continued, and his next words were the ones that broke the old order cleanly in two. She stands here, Kyle said, because I choose her. No elaborate ritual, no vow carved into ceremony, just choice. And the room understood what choice meant when it came from an Alpha King. It wasn't romance, it was politics with teeth. It was a declaration that could not be revised without blood. Varric's composure cracked just slightly. You are destroying everything he said, and for the first time, his voice carried real feeling fear. Kyle's eyes did not leave him. No, Kyle said. I am seeing it for the first time. Rowan moved. At Kale's smallest signal, guards stepped forward and closed around Varric. Varric stiffened. This is outrageous. Kale's voice was cold. You forged my authority. You stole a prisoner from my cells. You attempted to murder her before I could speak. Varric's eyes flashed. Without me, the council will splinter. Kyle's answer was quiet and deadly. Then it needed to. Varric was seized. The hall erupted, some voices protesting, others silent in stunned calculation. Seraphine's face remained composed, but her eyes were bright with anger she could not display. Lyra stood beside Kale as if she were carved there, breathing steadily, refusing to give the room the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. Kyle reached down and took her hand. Not a performance for the court, a simple human act. Lyra's fingers closed around his, surprising herself with the strength in her grip. For a moment, the noise of the hall faded, because in that one touch, the story shifted from accusation to reality. Lyra was not a rumor being debated. She was a person being held, and the person holding her was the most powerful Alpha in the realm. You could argue with law, you could twist history, but you could not argue with an Alpha King's choice without declaring yourself his enemy. That was the brutal clarity of their world. The aftermath did not end cleanly because nothing ever did when you ripped a lie out by the root. The council did splinter. Some elders withdrew in stunned silence. Others attempted to rally around old law demanding immediate containment, claiming Kale had been compromised. Lords from outer territories wrote furious letters in the days that followed. Whispers spread beyond Iron Veil like sparks. But the center held, because Kale held it. He met every objection without apology and without softness. He did not explain Lyra to make her palatable. He did not dress her in a narrative that fit their comfort. He refused to do the system's favorite cruelty, turning a person into a symbol. Lyra was not a symbol, she was Lyra. And that stubborn insistence, hers and then his, was what changed everything. 3 nights after the Great Hall, Lyra found herself in a guest chamber instead of a cell. The room was still stone, still cold at the edges, but there was a fire burning in the hearth and clean linens on the bed. A servant had left a tray with bread and broth. Lyra stared at it for a long time before she ate. Not because she wasn't hungry, because hunger was familiar. Safety was not. She ate slowly, listening to the palace sounds, distant footsteps, murmured voices, the crackle of fire. When the door opened, she stiffened automatically. Kale stepped in. No crown, no cloak. His shirt was dark sleeves rolled to the forearm as if he had been in meetings for hours and refused to pretend they hadn't exhausted him. He closed the door behind him. Lyra watched him, wary and attentive. Is it done? Kyle leaned against the doorframe, eyes fixed on her. No. Lyra's mouth tightened. Then it's worse. Kale's gaze softened a fraction, so small it might have been imagined, except Lyra had become skilled at detecting the difference between indifference and restraint. It's not worse, Kale said. It's just not finished. Lyra set her spoon down. They're going to keep trying. Kyle's voice was quiet. Yes. Lyra held his gaze. And you'll keep fighting. Kyle didn't answer immediately. He stepped forward and stopped a few feet away, careful not to crowd her. I will, he said. Lyra's throat tightened. Why, Kale's face was still, but his eyes held something rawer than Court ever saw. You already know why he said. Lyra stared at him. No, I know what you did. I don't know why you did it. Kyle exhaled slowly as if he were letting go of a breath he'd held for years. Because you sang, he said. Lyra blinked. That can't be enough. Kale's gaze stayed on her. It was not the song. Lyra waited. Kale's voice lowered. It was the fact that you sang when you had no reason to believe anyone would listen. Lyra's chest tightened. Kale continued each word deliberate. You did not plead. You did not perform. You did not bargain. You did not try to become what they wanted. He paused. You were yourself, Kale said, even when it could cost you your life. Lyra swallowed. I didn't have anything else. Kale stepped closer by half a pace. You did. You had fear, you had silence, you had the option to disappear. Lyra's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Kyle's voice was rougher now, and you refused. Lyra's eyes stung, not with tears yet, but with the pressure of something inside her that had been locked up too long. You make it sound noble, she said, voice low. It wasn't noble, it was desperation. Kyle shook his head once. Desperation is honest. Lyra let out a breath that trembled. I don't even know what I am. Kale's gaze did not waver. You are not a lie, he said again, and this time it sounded less like an argument and more like a vow. Lyra's voice cracked slightly. And if the truth is worse, Kale did not flinch. Then I will face it, he said, with you. Lyra stared at him, stunned by the simplicity of the offer. No promises of ease, no fantasies, just presence. She realized with a strange ache that she had never been offered that before. Not by anyone, not even by her mother who had loved her, but had been too afraid to say why she was always running. Lyra looked down at her hands. The bruises on her wrists were fading into purple shadows. The rope marks would take longer. Kyle's eyes followed her gaze. You shouldn't have these, he said. Lyra's laugh was soft and bitter. People like me usually have worse. Kyle's jaw tightened. Not anymore. The words were dangerous. Absolute. Like everything Kale said when he stopped pretending there were alternatives. Lyra looked up. Do you understand what you did in that hall? Kale met her gaze. Yes. Lyra's voice was quiet. You chose me in front of them. Kyle's voice was quieter. Yes, Lyra swallowed. So now I'm what your weapon? Your symbol? Kyle's expression hardened. No. Lyra waited. Kyle's voice came low, almost intimate. You are not something I use. Lyra's breath caught. Kyle continued careful. If you stay, it will be because you choose it too. Lyra stared at him, and for a moment the room felt too small to hold what was happening. She had lived her entire life being pushed from place to place by necessity and fear. Being chosen was a concept that had never belonged to her. And now a king was telling her she still had a choice. Lyra's voice shook slightly. I'm afraid. Kyle nodded once. Good. Lyra blinked. Good. Kale's mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite, but the edge of one that didn't fully form. Fear means you understand the weight, Kyle said. It does not mean you face it alone. Lyra stared at him, and something in her loosened. Not all at once, just enough to breathe. The palace settled into a new pattern, uneasy, shifting, full of eyes. Lyra learned quickly that being chosen did not mean being welcomed. It meant being watched more than ever. Servants glanced at her and then away. Guards stiffened when she passed. Noble women whispered behind sleeves. Council elders avoided looking directly at her, as if eye contact might legitimize her existence. Lyra found herself in the courtyard one evening, drawn by the need for space. The sky was clear stars, scattered the air sharp with winter. She stood alone beside a stone wall and looked up, letting the cold bite her cheeks, letting it remind her that she was real. Footsteps approached behind her. She did not startle. Kale had a way of moving that her body recognized now. Not because he was loud, but because the air changed when he entered it. He stopped beside her, leaving a respectful distance. They stood in silence for a while, and Lyra realized that silence could mean different things, depending on who shared it. With her captors, silence had been threat. With Kale, it was space. Kyle finally asked, Does it hurt? Lyra glanced at him. What? Kyle's eyes flicked to her wrist where the bruises showed beneath her sleeve. That. Lyra looked down, then shrugged. It's fine. Kyle's expression tightened. You always say that. Lyra's mouth twitched. It's habit. Kyle was quiet, then said, You don't need that habit here. Lyra laughed softly, not amused. Habits don't vanish because a king says they can. Kyle didn't argue. Instead, he asked, Will you sing again? Lyra froze slightly. Why, she asked. Kyle's gaze remained forward, but his voice softened. Because the first time you sang it saved you. Lyra's throat tightened. It also ruined me. Kyle turned his head. Did it? Lyra looked away toward the dark garden. It made me visible? Kyle's voice was quiet. You were always visible. They just chose not to see you. Lyra swallowed. She had never known how much it hurt to be seen until she experienced it. Because being seen meant being targeted. Being seen meant being judged. Being seen meant you could no longer hide behind invisibility. Lyra drew a breath. I don't know if I can sing without shaking. Kyle's voice was steady. Then shake. Lyra looked at him. He met her gaze unflinching. I don't want your perfection, Kyle said. I want your truth. Lyra's eyes stung. For a moment she thought she might cry. The impulse rose, unexpectedly sharp and humiliating, but she did not cry. She lifted her chin and said, You're making this harder. Kale's mouth twitched again, that almost smile. I know. Lyra's breath hitched. You don't apologize. Kale's gaze held hers, not for choosing. Lyra's chest tightened at the word. Choosing. It sounded like a warm thing, a comforting thing, but in their world, choosing was an act with claws. Lyra looked back up at the sky. If I sing, she said, it won't be for them. Kyle's voice was low. Good. They stood together, not touching, but close enough that Lyra could feel the heat of him in the cold. And in that closeness, Lyra understood something she had never understood before. There were people who wanted you to exist only as a category, a label. a threat, a symbol. And then there was the rare, terrifying possibility of someone wanting you to exist as yourself. That was the kind of desire that changed a life. Sometimes it saved it, sometimes it demanded a cost. Later that night, after the palace quieted, Lyra found herself in a small music room near the west corridor. It was not grand, no court audience here, no formal instruments arranged for performance. Just a wooden bench, a single lute hanging unused, a narrow window where moonlight slipped in like a secret. Lyra stood in the center of the room and stared at the floor. Her heart beat too hard, as if her body still believed she was at the square. Cale had not followed her in. He had stopped at the doorway and waited, giving her space. He leaned against the frame, hands folded behind his back in a posture that looked like habit. Lyra's voice came small in the quiet. "You're watching?" Kyle answered simply. "I'm here." Lyra swallowed. "That's worse." Kyle's gaze did not shift. "Then tell me to leave?" Lyra opened her mouth. She did not tell him to leave. That silence was her first choice. She drew a breath. The air smelled of old wood and dust. Her throat felt tight, as if the song had been turned into a knot and lodged there. She thought about her mother, about the nights her mother had whispered, "Don't sing it outside," about the fear behind the warning. She thought about the square, the axe, the cold stone under her knees, and then she thought about something new, a quiet room, a fire, a choice. Lyra lifted her head. She sang. The first note trembled, not because she was weak, because the body remembered danger. The melody rose anyway, thin at first, then stronger. It filled the room with something ancient and aching. The song did not ask for mercy. It did not demand applause. It simply existed. Kyle did not move. He did not flinch. He did not interrupt. He did not command. He listened. Lyra sang until the last note faded into silence, and the room held its breath, as if unwilling to let it go. When she stopped, her hands were shaking. She did not try to hide it. Kyle spoke, voice quiet. This time he said, "Who did you sing?" For Lyra's throat tightened. She stared at the floor for a moment, then answered without turning. "For me," she said. A beat of silence. Kyle pushed off the doorway and walked in slowly, giving her the space to retreat if she wanted to. He stopped beside her. He did not touch her. He simply stood at her side, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him, close enough that his presence became something her body could lean toward, even if her mind still feared it. Lyra's voice was almost a whisper. "Do you still feel it?" Kale's answer came without hesitation. "Yes." Lyra swallowed. "Does it frighten you?" Kale looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, honest and unadorned, "Only because it is real." Lyra's eyes stung again. She breathed in slowly. Outside, the palace was still full of enemies and doubts and shifting alliances. Tomorrow would bring letters and meetings and the grinding effort of forcing an old world to accept a new truth. But for this moment, Lyra stood in a quiet room, her song still hanging in the air like a faint glow, and she understood the circle had closed. In the beginning, she sang so she would not disappear. In the end, she sang so she could exist. The difference was not the melody. The difference was that this time someone heard her and did not turn away. And if there was a lesson tucked into the bones of it, it was this: power could be inherited. Authority could be demanded, but choice, true choice, was what revealed a person's character. Kale had been given a crown. Tonight he proved who he was by what he refused to let the world erase. Lyra had been given nothing. Tonight she proved who she was by the one thing she had always owned: her voice. Thank you for staying with this story where a single song turned a death sentence into something far more powerful. If it moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below, and a quiet like helps more people discover stories like this. If you enjoy these kinds of emotional, unexpected journeys, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. There are many more stories waiting, each with a moment that changes everything.